Welcome, everyone. So, have you ever looked around your house and noticed, well, a trail of abandoned projects? Today, in this explainer, we're going to unpack the architecture of intellectual hunger. We're diving into the fascinating, kind of hidden psychology behind why we so often start new things with an absolute bang, only to drop them entirely just a short time later. If you've got a graveyard of half-finished projects, maybe a $200 acoustic guitar that's basically just acting as a coat rack right now, well, you're in the exact right place. Okay, let's dive right into this. Why exactly do we quit new hobbies? I mean, we've all been there, right? You find something brand new, you completely obsess over it with this intense focus, and then, seemingly out of nowhere, you just stop. The fire goes out. What is actually happening in our brains when that sudden shift occurs? Why does the mind move on so quickly? To really set the stage here, let's look at a few highly relatable moments of hyperfixation. Maybe you decided one random weekend that you were going to build custom furniture, right? So you immediately bought all the expensive woodworking gear, vividly imagining the smell of fresh sawdust in your own personal shop. Or perhaps you spent 3 consecutive nights staying up until 4 a.m. just binge-watching complex chess tutorials. Or maybe you completely redesigned your backyard in a meticulously color-coded spreadsheet, totally convinced you were about to become a master gardener. You dive in incredibly deep. But then, just a few weeks later, all that expensive equipment is sitting in a corner collecting dust, and you're left wondering, what on earth happened? Now, what's really interesting here is the contrast. From the outside view, this whole pattern looks like a lack of discipline. People might call you lazy or just assume you're being flaky. But looking at the inside view, psychology shows us something entirely different. Guys, this isn't laziness. It's actually a sign of intense intellectual hunger, incredibly complex dopamine cycles, and a high IQ mind striving for cognitive efficiency. You aren't just losing interest, your brain is operating on a level of rapid information processing that most people never even notice. You're actually being incredibly efficient with your mental resources.
So let's break this down into 5 psychological drivers, starting with reason 1, the curiosity dopamine reward.
This introduces a fascinating mental framework known as the curiosity system. Basically, it's a state where the actual act of learning and decoding a new challenge acts as the trigger for a massive dopamine reward in your brain. For highly intelligent people, the real thrill isn't in repeatedly doing the physical hobby itself. No, the thrill is entirely in the challenge of decoding it. Your brain is quite literally wired to seek out random topics with intense focus. But here's the kicker. Once you've learned enough to understand how the hobby works, and you've effectively decoded the puzzle, your brain stops getting its chemical reward. The dopamine spikes stop dead in their tracks because, well, the mystery is gone. And your mind naturally starts looking around for the next big puzzle to solve.
Moving right along to reason 2, confusing thinking with progress.
And this brilliantly illustrates the vast divide between mental simulation and actual practice. Psychology reveals that just imagining yourself succeeding at a new hobby, like vividly picturing yourself flawlessly playing a difficult song on that guitar or finishing a beautiful painting, actually gives your brain a profound sense of achievement. Your brain releases these little hits of satisfaction that make you feel like you've already made real progress. Because of that, when it actually comes time for the practice, the repetitive, slow, kind of uncomfortable physical work, your brain loses all its urgency. I know, it can be so frustrating to feel exhausted before you even pick up a paintbrush. But neurologically speaking, your brain has already experienced the win. It already painted the masterpiece in your head. So the physical follow-through just feels completely unnecessary to your nervous system.
Which brings us to reason 3, the pattern recognition trump.
Pattern recognition is your brain's absolute, relentless drive to make sense of unpredictable information and build predictable structures out of it. And highly aware people are constantly doing this. When you first start a new hobby, it's incredibly engaging, right? Why? Because it's full of wildly unpredictable variables. Your mind has to work so incredibly hard to understand the new rules, the new movements, the new logic. That unpredictability is literal catnip for a hungry mind. But for a high IQ mind, that dynamic changes incredibly fast. Let's walk through exactly how this unfolds. Step 1, you engage with an unpredictable hobby, and almost immediately, your brain goes to work solving the underlying pattern. That's step 2. It maps out the rules, the techniques, the required steps. Step 3, once that pattern is solved, the reward becomes entirely predictable. And just like that, step 4, the excitement vanishes. Poof. You really have to realize that you aren't quitting because the hobby is too hard. You're quitting because your brain has effectively solved the pattern. It simply no longer offers the mental friction or stimulation you crave to stay engaged.
Now let's look at reason 4, cognitive exhaustion. We call this cognitive complexity. This happens when you don't just do a hobby. Instead, you analyze every single angle, every consequence, and every possibility before you even begin. For example, you don't just decide to try knitting, no way. You spend 40 hours researching the optimal yarn tensile strength and investigating the geopolitical supply chain of wool. While this intense seeking for depth is absolutely a sign of high intelligence and deep curiosity, it also comes with a really heavy cognitive cost. It severely drains your mental energy reserves. The reality is, your brain is absolutely exhausted before you even start practicing. By the time you're actually supposed to sit down and physically do the work, you are already completely drained from all the mental simulation and deep dive research you've just performed. This cognitive exhaustion makes you feel wiped out just thinking about picking up the tools or starting the routine. And this is exactly why hobbies that are supposed to be fun, relaxing escapes suddenly start feeling like a demanding chore.
And finally, we arrive at reason 5, selective mental bandwidth.
So the crucial point here is that highly intelligent minds practice what's called selective organization. They don't put their energy into everything equally. Instead, they efficiently reallocate their mental energy only to what matters in that specific moment. During that initial obsession phase, you are incredibly organized and focused. You're soaking up information like a giant sponge. But once that curiosity is satisfied, you simply ignore the rest. You efficiently move from consumption to creation, shifting your cognitive bandwidth to the next valuable thing to decode, completely discarding what you no longer need. Ultimately, what looks like inconsistency from the outside is actually mental efficiency. It really is an optimization strategy. Your brain is staying incredibly optimized by only focusing its limited cognitive bandwidth on what currently excites and challenges it. It flat out refuses to waste precious processing power on the mundane routine of doing something it has already successfully decoded.
Let's move to the next section and see how this builds into mapping your intellectual hunger. Your graveyard of hobbies is actually a map of your curiosity. I want you to let that sink in for a second. Those abandoned projects aren't a monument to a lack of discipline, not at all. They are a physical map showing exactly where your brilliant, hungry mind has traveled over the years. It's time to completely remove the guilt associated with those unused woodworking tools or those unplanted garden seeds. They serve their purpose in feeding your mind. You aren't failing to finish. You are successfully learning. You've simply absorbed the core lesson that the hobby had to teach you. And once that lesson is over, your mind isn't giving up. It's simply ready, optimized, and energized for the next big challenge. Once you start understanding these complex dopamine cycles and patterns, you start seeing your own behavior and your brilliantly restless mind in a completely new, empowering way. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I'll leave you with this exciting thought. What pattern will you solve next? Your intellectual hunger is an incredibly powerful tool. It's an asset, not a flaw. Instead of fighting it or feeling guilty about it, what happens if you just lean into it and let your mind completely follow its curiosity? Keep learning, keep decoding, and I'll see you in the next one.